Hello, I'm Bernie Martin Beck, and welcome to Journeys and Journals. I get to talk to the most interesting people in Southern Oregon and Northern California. I'd like you to meet the most special one of all. This is my nephew, Brent Martin, and I am so glad you're here. You've come a long way to come back home, right? Where's home now?
Currently, I live in New Haven, Connecticut.
What are you doing in New Haven?
I'm currently attending Yale School of Architecture to get my master's in architecture.
Well, when you left Grants Pass a few years back, did you have any idea that you were going to be an architect?
No, not really. I left when I was 15 and moved to California to start going to school, high school, and then college. And I didn't really know what I was going to do.
You've had an interesting career up to now. What was that?
Well, I went to Art Center in Pasadena to become a graphic designer because I always knew that, I didn't always know. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, whether I wanted to be a scientist or an artist or a business person or any of that. But I finally decided when I was 17, that's it, I'm going to be an artist no matter what. And graphic design allowed me to have a job and be an artist at the same time.
Right, and so you did things like, for someone else, they'd say, we want this drawn. And you were, is this an example of what you did as a graphic artist?
No, that is not an example.
Okay.
A graphic designer would design print pieces primarily. That was the original function of graphic designer. They did typography, business cards, magazine layouts, book layout. I designed cookbooks. I worked for the Getty. I worked in Los Angeles after I graduated and designed music CDs and all kinds of cultural artifacts.
Right, you worked at Stanford with the Stanford organization, university for?
I eventually moved to San Francisco and worked for an architecture firm in San Francisco, and this is what eventually led me to architecture. And they did a lot of projects for Stanford and Berkeley and all of the various biotech companies in the area. So yes, I worked for Stanford.
And the idea is that you have skills and they'd tell you what they wanted and then you'd put it together on paper? Is that how it works?
More or less,
or
yeah.
Or did you dream it up?
Let's see. Usually there's I have dreamt things up before and then you pitch them and then you have to sell them to whoever you're pitching them to. And that's a little harder. But usually there's some kind of need, and then when there's that, you can guide it. So.
And his office was in this incredible part of San Francisco that is window to the world. You had the view of the whole Bay Area.
We were in the China Basin Landing building, which is across the street from Pac Bell Park. And we were on the end by Pac Bell Park. So we would look out, we could see all of Oakland and Berkeley and Pac Bell, and then all of downtown as well.
Well, you gave that all up. You gave it up for something that's far, far greater, a new career, here you were on the West Coast. What in the world took an Oregon boy across the country?
Well, I guess as a graphic designer, I'd sort of hit a glass ceiling in terms of, not really, but my work in an architecture firm was limited because I wasn't an architect. And I was doing as much as I possibly could there to be a graphic designer empowered in an architecture firm working and doing all kinds of things. And then one day I was introduced to a young lady who was an intern from Yale, and my life changed forever.
Tell me more.
Oh, right. Her name is Rose, And she was lovely and bright, and we started dating about a month after she came. And then about a month after that, I decided, you know what, I need to go back to architecture school. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, so I should do it.
At Yale.
No, but
That's where.
that's what got me there. Yep.
Well, Rose is in the studio today, and we are just so pleased to have met her and have her come all the way out to Oregon. And wedding bells are ringing.
They are. We're going to be married here next July.
Wonderful. While we're just talking about a little, why don't you tell me how your family and our family got interested in all these toys around here? Where can we start?
Do you want to start with Milford, or,
Okay.
I mean, you really want to tell the story?
Well, we can say Milford was a photographer.
Milford was a photographer. He worked for the Kellogg's back in Battle Creek as a PR man and photographer. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
And they slowly moved across the country and eventually made it to Spokane, Washington, where he had a photo studio. Do you have that one there? And this is quite a storefront, actually. It's a corner spot in Spokane, probably in the teens, and it says, "Don't let your face die with you. Get Martinized." And it's a fairly aggressive PR or advertising facade for a photography studio in a small western town, I would say.
Right, and Spokane was considered to be the right place to live. I don't know if it predated Seattle and Portland and all the rest, but it was the upper crust kind of place to live. This is Milford's mother and grandmother, and they were Canadians who'd come from Ireland with some hope, but very little else. And by the time, this must have been really, really big time, because, you know, you have a downtown corner and don't let your face die with you. You know, we've got quite a number of pictures. The museum there in Spokane has asked for copies of everything that relate to it. It's one of the reasons I got interested in history. It's a shame to just let the box art mold the pictures and all.
Right.
Your grandpa, Grampy as we called him, had a long history of being interested in history. This he built, it must have been a child, because the writing here, property of Robert Martin, and he collected flowers. I had a whole book of Los Angeles wildflowers and where they were found, and fortunately I could, and that technical names that he'd done in high school, and I gave those back to Southern California. But tell me a little bit about here's the picture of the Martins. You've got your dad, your grandpa,
Right.
side by side, grandma and us kids,
Aunt Mary Fisher.
and her mother, which is our great-grandma, your great-great-grandma.
Aha.
She only lived to be 95, 6, 7, something like that. So you've got a lot of years to be an architect. What about the advertising, the assignments that you get at architectural school? What do they ask you to do in this one?
Well, I think I'm being led here, so I'll just take it away. This was actually and this is an explanation drawing that I did to explain it to Bernie, of a structures class where you're given 20 sheets of 8.5 by 11 paper. And just like this one, and a bottle of Elmer's glue and 36 inches of string. And you have to span 8 inches and sustain a point load in the center. And that load will be increased until the structure fails.
It's a bridge
It's a bridge, essentially. That's
between
correct.
here and here. 2 tables?
Right. 2 tables, 8 inches. So I designed this particular structure, and it broke the record, I think, by 3 times, and it sustained 388 pounds of force. And it's a tubular structure here that creates a peak that bears on a centerpiece.
Now,
So that's an example of a technical assignment.
okay, and this is what kind of an assignment?
That's a skills assignment. That would be a drawing, it starts off as a freehand drawing, and then it becomes sort of a freehand 3D construction. So we go out and we study a building, and then come back to the studio and put together a formal drawing of what we saw.
This happens to be my Christmas gift this year from Brent, and I am thrilled to have it. I don't have a wall big enough to put it up, but thank you, Brent. You've done so many things. Let's get back to Southern Oregon. What's the big draw to come back here for your wedding? Here you're on the East Coast. Rose is from the Midwest. Why come back out here? I mean, other than we'd love to have you.
Well, it's a beautiful place. It's a great place for people to travel for a vacation if they're going to take time off to come to our wedding. We have people traveling from all over the world and all over the country to come to our wedding, so they will obviously be making a trip out of it. So Southern Oregon is a great place in the summer for that.
Does Rose have a larger family than we?
Rose happens to have 13 brothers and sisters. She has 9 sisters and 4 brothers. And so her immediate family is 45 or 50 people.
We're looking forward to meeting them, anything like Rose. We just have a treat in store for us. Let's just grab anything here, Brent. You can tell me what this means to you.
Well, that means to me, that would be my grandfather's early car business. He started the dealership in 1933, I believe, and sold Studebakers and Packards, of which we have models here in the background. And as those Studebaker and Packard slowly went out of business due to the pressures of the big 3, he picked up some foreign models and carried Mercedes, Volvo, and Datsun. Or Nissan.
Yeah.
And I worked in that shop from the time I was 11 years old until I was 15 and left town, and worked as a mechanic in the shop and pulling weeds outside and learning about fixing cars.
Great skills.
Yeah.
Great skills. And one other thing, this was the logo because it was the street address. But you learned something about investing. These kids worked from the time you were?
Well, the first time I had a paying job was when I was 11.
Because you were homeschooled.
I was homeschooled in 6th and 7th grade.
And that
in 7th and 8th grade.
And that was part of your homeschooling, was to have a job? And
no, I think I decided to do homeschooling on my own. But working with, gaining a work ethic, I mean, we worked around the house and on our property since I was very young. Christmas and Thanksgiving were all about yard work, not about hanging out in the house. So I've learned to work really hard since I was a kid.
You surely have, but not just from the Martin side of the family. What about the fish?
Well, the fish is referencing my grandfather on my mother's side, Walt Wampler, who was a self-taught geologist, astronomer, sport fisherman, fly tyer, overall interesting guy. He cut stones. He collected rocks and minerals and made his own telescopes.
He made telescopes. And he was a businessman, too.
Right, he was a businessman. He owned Selco Lighting here in town for many years.
In Visalia, he had a lighting store there?
I believe so. He
And
also was the first one to carry televisions. And they had the first television in the Central Valley, probably, in their home. And everyone came over to watch Monday Night Wrestling, I think.
I think that was real big of it. Now, your grandfather's passed away, but your grandma, she just continues to show us how to do it graciously. She's the hardest working woman, I think. Tell me a little bit about Grandma. She birthed 3 girls at one time. That was incredible.
She did. She's an amazing woman. She's got a lot of spunk, and she still drives around either all over the West Coast, in her own 4-wheeler, and explores and lives life really to its fullest.
Golf carts.
She plays golf. She's teaching my mother how to play golf.
Yay.
She met her new husband on the golf course. Built herself a house when she was 80 years old, or no, 75, maybe. I don't know. She built herself a house lately down in Arizona.
I've never remember when my brother Henry came home and said he had met this fantastic family, and they lived down on the Rogue River, and I'd never been down there. What did they bought?
They bought the OK Corral.
And it was an old barn.
It was an old barn, I believe, in a farmhouse, and they converted the barn into the house. And that, I don't actually remember ever going down there when they owned it. They had sold it by the time I was old enough to remember, but we would go back on the jet boat trips, and that's where we'd have dinner.
It was incredible. The barn was the most beautiful home you could just imagine. Now it's history, but you've done other things on the Rogue River besides visit Grandma and go to OK Corral. What about this outdoorsman in you?
Rafting. We've rafted. We've fished. My grandfather owned another home on the river up closer to, say, Schroeder Park, and had a dock and a jet boat, and we would go out steelhead fishing in the early mornings in the fog, and with our hand warmers. Trying to keep your hands warm when you're 6 years old is really hard. But we had a great time fishing all up and down the river.
And walking the river?
We've walked it. My family and I did the Lower Rogue hike, backpacking. That was a lot of fun.
Well,
and I've also hiked all over the West Coast.
Including?
Mount Whitney.
Showing Rose?
Showing Rose, right. The first, Rose told me she wanted to go to Yosemite, and I figure if you're going to go to Yosemite, you've got to climb Half Dome, because hanging out in Curry Village isn't really going to Yosemite. So I took her on our first trip together. We went to Yosemite and woke up early the next morning and climbed Half Dome, and that's where I asked her to marry me.
Oh, what did she say?
She said, you can't ask me that right now.
And now that she knows you lots better, she says,
yes.
Wonderful. Brent, when I found out a little bit about the history of our family, as you said, our grandfather on the Martin side was a photographer. He did what they call postcard photography all over the West Coast. And our grandparents, Westfall, were missionaries, and they went to South America. What about the trip to South America?
Well, one summer, actually, this was a this was a really big summer for me because I rode my bike from the Washington border to Alaska and took 3 weeks to ride up there with a friend of mine. And that was a great adventure. And then we flew back home and flew our bikes home, and we got on a plane. I got on a plane with my parents, and we flew down to South America for the 100th anniversary of my great-grandfather going down there as a missionary. And my grandmother was also born in Chile, and we went down and saw where she was born.
Down in Mapuche land, which is the equivalent of the Wild West for us. Is there anything that you can think of? I see an art challenge over there that has my name in it, and I'd like you to pick that up and just brag a little bit, let me brag a little bit about it.
Okay.
I gave him a challenge one time, and I said,
This is a sketch, mind you.
This is a sketch.
Right. It's not final artwork.
Oh, well.
It's a pretty good sketch, though.
I saw, he just took watercolors, and I wanted something that just reminded him of me, put on the end of an orange crate.
That's right. Retro orange box label or fruit box label that could be put on a fruit box.
It has real significance to me. He even put my motto underneath and signed this. He says,
"She did what she could."
I am proud of this. I take very good care. In fact, I like it so much I've had it made in a much bigger picture, because hidden in this are my bears and my love of hearts, and made into little greeting cards and great big posters. There's some real meaning there, Brent. Thanks for taking my challenge seriously enough to make that happen. So that's what I get one year for Christmas. Then I get this beautiful thing, plus others, for Christmas this year. You surely know how to make me smile. Brag a little bit about this. When you say graphics, this is what your dad and your granddad did, a newsletter.
Right.
Do you see yourself as having that kind of thing in your mind about putting together, were these the kinds of presentations that you would have done?
Sometimes. I mean, it all depends on the media that you want. And do I consider myself a newspaper designer?
No.
No. But this is an excellent example of a business keeping in touch with its customer base and making sure that when their car needs come up, they always have something at hand that reminds them
of just where to find Otto Martin. And there was
Right.
a picture of Father after the accident and in the wheelchair and doing the very best he could, even after getting disabled. Maybe that didn't stop him. There's a picture on over there of Brent. Why don't you pick that up? And
Okay.
where were you and what were you doing there?
Well, this would be a picture of the interior of Maria's kitchen, where we've been eating for quite some years, I think, probably 20 years now. And I don't think Maria's has changed that much. It's fantastic.
It even says on the sign, the shack by the tracks.
Right.
And it looks like it.
It used to be between a mill on this side and the railroad tracks. There was a mill, an irrigation ditch, and the railroad tracks here. And Maria's was just a little tiny shack there with some gravel in the front.
And it's become kind of a family. She did the grand farewell party for your family when they moved to France after they'd retired. What was it like to leave Grants Pass, Southern Oregon, places you loved, and move follow your folks to France?
Well, I left before they left. I went to go to high school. And I don't know, I'm always an adventurer. And so I'll go anywhere.
Have you been to Crater Lake?
I have been to Crater Lake.
Have you walked down to the rim down to the water?
I don't think I have, no.
Well, I invite you and Rose back because I really want to do that walk, but I don't want to do it alone.
All right, that sounds great. I think we should go snorkeling in Crater Lake.
Why not?
It's really clear, right?
Incredibly. And nobody's gotten quite to the bottom yet, I don't think. Brent, I see your family and the future looks really bright with Rose in the picture. What do you see? How many more years? What's Rose's education goal?
Rose is in the same program I am. She's a year ahead of me, and when we graduate, we will probably move back to the West Coast.
Oh, goody.
Somewhere, and start working, paying off our student loans.
I understand that. Just before we close, I wanted just to show you a little bit of your grandpa's artwork, and this will be yours. What's it about?
He cut his own Christmas cards out of linoleum blocks and printed them on his own press every Christmas. And these blocks and some of the other scrapbooks were the first introduction to sort of the creative fields that I ever got.
So this would be inked, paper would be put down.
And the rollers would go over it. It would be clamped together and...
Little hand press, no bigger than
Yep.
this.
hand operated.
I can hear the clank, clank, and the ink going around. I look forward to seeing your future because I am a believer, and since the day you were born. He's the last of the Martins, which is kind of exciting, and we have all this Martin Studebaker to Hey, time's up. I'm saying goodbye for now, and thanks so much, Brent, for being my guest.
Thank you for having me.